Good evening, everyone. This is Two-Way Tonight. Things change fast in the news business, even in the summer. A few hours ago, I taped a new episode of Next Up, where I did my reported monologue on what I said at the time were the five biggest, most significant fights in American politics. Those were Rahm Emanuel versus the left, Donald Trump versus the Wall Street Journal, James Carville versus Mr. Mondami, uh, Scott Bessent versus the Fed, and Hunter Biden versus everybody. Well, welcome to the new reality, because the biggest fight going on right now in our world is Donald Trump versus Barack Obama, or as Donald Trump would call him, Barack Hussein Obama. This thing's exploded mightily, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll try to talk about it in a substantive way, because our guest tonight is one of the most substantive people you'll ever get a chance to talk to. Niall Ferguson, historian, scholar, man about the global world, football fan, and got to keep things on the up and up, which doesn't mean we won't talk about Epstein, because a big part of the Trump versus Obama fight is about, yes, Jeffrey Epstein. So we'll talk about what's going on with the two presidents. We'll talk about the latest developments in the Epstein matter, which includes the House of Representatives basically being brought to a standstill. So people said the executive branch was, locked up because of they tied in knots over Jeffrey Epstein. Well, they continued to do stuff, and there's some new developments in the executive branch we'll talk about there, but they're not paralyzed. The House of Representatives, one half of 1/3 of our branches, is basically paralyzed now because some House Republicans want to go further on Jeffrey Epstein than the Speaker does. And I got to tell you, I don't really know why the Speaker is adopting this posture, but he's going to send everybody home till the fall because of Jeffrey Epstein. Interesting development. We also have a little more on Hunter Biden, one of our favorite stories from yesterday, and we'll continue to try to find some deep meaning there. And then we could spend the entire episode talking about President Trump's views on a variety of other issues expressed in a White House photo op and building something in the Rose Garden. And he had so many things to say about so many things, including Adam Schiff. So we'll get to as much of that as we can. And then finally, with Wick, our polling partner, we have a new poll on the New York City mayor's race. And I say, both with no modesty and without fear of contradiction, it's the best poll I've seen on the mayor's race, in part because it's timely. There hasn't been a poll in a while of this quality. And second, because we ask questions no one has asked that tell you not just about New York City, but about Donald Trump and about the mood of the electorate nationally, we believe. And we'll talk to Neil about some of that. So in a moment, I'm going to bring Neil in. We're going to show him some of the video and graphics from today, and he and I will chat a bit. And then, as always, your questions. If you're here on the Two-Way platform, please raise your electronic hand to get in the queue. That's what Neil would call it. I'd say get in line, but Neil would say queue. And if you're watching on YouTube or X, don't raise your hand. Please don't put smack in the chat, and everything you write in there should be clever, witty, imbued with peace, love, and understanding, and the presumption of grace for all. This is going to be a whirlwind episode because we do have a ton to get to. And I will just say that, once again, it's been true all week. I could lead with 7 different things, but I believe the currents of American democracy and politics and whatever has happened for the last 10 years with Donald Trump, it's all embodied by what's going on with President Obama and President Trump. And so we are going to do our best to make sense of it in just a moment. But first, as we do every night at about this time, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor now is Indeed. Indeed will help you hire quickly, which, if you're trying to hire, is important. I'm trying to hire some people right now, and we need to go quick. Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your listings out there in front of the right candidates. The best way to do it is with Indeed Sponsors Jobs. It helps you get folks quickly and allows your listing to stand out and allows you to hire fast. You jump to the top of the page. It makes a huge difference according to the Indeed team. Sponsored posts reach 45% more applicants than the non-sponsored posts. So you want to do a sponsored post. That's apparent to me. The best way to do that is to go to Indeed.com and apply for your $75 sponsored job credit. How do you get that, you might ask? The way you get that, you put in Indeed.com/two-way, and you get $75 off your first sponsored job credit. Again, go to Indeed.com/two-way right now. Support our program by doing this. They keep scientific metrics. They know every one of you who goes to Indeed.com/two-way, and they know that you heard about it on this show. So please do that. Indeed.com/two-way, terms and conditions apply. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right. Here comes Neil, and then here comes Trump versus Obama, which you won't hear about on my podcast because it just happened. Neil, welcome. Thank you for making time. You're about the busiest person I know, so I couldn't be happier to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Mark, and I'm looking forward to this. Although you have to bear in mind that you follow the news cycle a lot more closely than I. I'm a historian. I spend a large part of my time in the past. So you're kind of wrenching me into the present with all of this Trump v. Obama stuff. But I'll do my best.
You'll do just fine. It's a shame that we couldn't clone you, because if we could clone you, you could co-host the show every night, or better, take over the show every night. But we'll take you for an hour. We'll see how it goes. Again, if you want to get in on the conversation, please raise your hand for an opportunity. Some people pay $80,000 a year to enroll in a top university to be able to ask Neil a question once a semester. This one's a freebie. No 80 grand. So if you want to be in the conversation, please raise your hand. All right, let's start because I want to get to a bunch of stuff, including Russia, because I'm eager to ask you what you think's happening there. But let's start with Obama and Trump. And again, in the historical context, two United States presidents going at it like schoolboys fighting over the last piece of fudge. Here is President Trump today in the Oval Office talking about Barack Obama. It says he was the ringleader, along with Hillary Clinton. This would be number one of an attempt to basically put Donald Trump in prison for colluding with Russia. Number one, please.
Barack Hussein Obama is the ringleader. Hillary Clinton was right there with him, and so was Sleepy Joe Biden, and so were the rest of them. Comey, Clapper, the whole group. And they tried to rig an election, and they got caught. And then they did rig the election in 2020. And then because I knew I won that election by a lot, I did it a third time, and I won in a landslide. Every swing state won the popular vote. But I won that all the same way in 2020. And look at the damage that was caused.
All right, one more. He talked about it at length. Here's number three, same topic.
But what we found is even more so. Now, we found absolute, this isn't like evidence, this is like proof, irrefutable proof that Obama was seditious, that Obama was trying to lead a coup, and it was with Hillary Clinton, with all these other people, but Obama headed it up. And, I get a kick when I hear everyone talks about people I never even heard of. It was this one. No. It was Obama. He headed it up. And it says so right in the papers. Got everything. This is the biggest scandal in the history of our country. And it really goes on to even the auto pen, because it all relates to the same thing. It all started the same sick minds. You have an auto pen, which is a tremendous, well, we don't have a president. We have an auto pen that signs everything. I'll bet you sign everything. You don't have auto pens. Everybody. Who doesn't sign? You're the president of a country. But it's all that whole thing leading right up to the end of it is the auto pen. And the auto pen was used by people, and Biden knew nothing about it. They were signing documents that he knew nothing about. As an example,
Neil, impressions to the contrary on social media. I work really hard not to be a nerd to the things that comes out of his mouth. So when he says biggest scandal in American history, I judge it on that basis. One more thing, and then I'm going to ask you your thoughts on this, and I'll start with some history. This is Barack Obama, who his normal attitude when Donald Trump accuses him of stuff, his normal attitude is this. He doesn't care. But today, he did care enough to have his spokesperson put out this statement, number 5. They put it also on X. Here's what President Obama's office said, not President Obama, but his office. Out of respect for the office of the presidency, our office does not normally dignify our office does not normally dignify the constant nonsense and misinformation flowing out of this White House with a response. But these claims are outrageous enough to merit one. These bizarre allegations are ridiculous and a weak attempt at distraction. Nothing in the document issued last week undercuts the widely accepted conclusion that Russia worked to influence the 2016 presidential election, but did not successfully manipulate any votes. These findings were affirmed in a 2020 report by the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee led by then Chairman Marco Rubio. All right. So, Neil, let's start with history. Is there any antecedent for this, any precedent for this in American history, a current president and a former president going at each other in such personal and hyperbolic terms?
You need to go back to the 19th century, I think. Part of our problem when we think about American politics is that we're very influenced by the relatively recent past. And if you think back through politics in our lifetimes, there were certain rules, I think of them as the Ivy League rules, which constrained behavior by presidents in and out of office. But in many ways, President Trump has taken American politics back to the 19th century, not only ideologically, tariffs, exclusion on immigration, but also stylistically. And so this is much more the kind of politics that Americans were accustomed to in the 19th century. When Charles Dickens came to this country, the thing that most shocked him was the incredibly vituperative character of politics, which was much nastier than English politics to which he was accustomed. Americans got more gentlemanly, especially in the politics after World War II. And so this seems shocking to us. But in fact, presidents and former presidents were always taking chunks and lumps out of one another back in the 19th century. Of course, American political nastiness even produced a civil war back then. So that's how to think about this. Second historical bit of context, the biggest scandal in American political life in the last 100 years was certainly Watergate. And so whenever anybody tries to argue that this is the biggest scandal, that they've set themselves a very high bar, because Watergate ultimately brought President Nixon down. And I'm not seeing anything yet that's going to lead to anything as ignominious as Richard Nixon's downfall.
Do you understand what Tulsi Gabbard is asserting that President Trump is so keen on? Do you understand it?
Not really. I think my understanding here, but you can put me right, is that we're seeing the great art of changing the subject. The subject up until this, as you pointed out in your intro, Mark, was Epstein and the extraordinary rift that's opened up in the MAGA movement or in Trump world between the president and those close to him and those people who perhaps are closer to Tucker Carlson and others in the kind of media world who think that there is a cover-up going on here and are genuinely upset about it. So I think what President Trump's doing in going after Obama is partly trying to just change the subject, because the Epstein thing is the first, I think, real problem that this second Trump term has run into with respect to the people who voted him into office, who in every other respect, I think, are quite satisfied with what he's done. But you tell me I'm misreading this.
No, I agree with all of that. I've tried to understand what Congresswoman Gabbard, Director Gabbard means, and I really don't quite understand it. And I understand President Obama's frustration. And I also know that Donald Trump has the best ability to change the subject of anybody I've ever covered. And he'll try different things, and he has tried different things. But whether it's to distract the media or simultaneously to bring his base fully back home, he tried Comey, and Comey's pretty good at that. But nothing is a hotter hot button for what he needs to do than Barack Obama. You can't, if you're in the press, not cover Trump versus Obama. I mean, you have to cover it. It's mandatory. So I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. We're talking about Epstein. What's leaving Britain aside, because they have scandals like this all the time. What's an antecedent in the United States for something like the Epstein matter? Is there one?
Well, it's worth mentioning that Britain specializes in cover-ups. It's really our national sport. You thought
there's several going on, several being exposed now.
It's the defining characteristic of British government to try and hush things up. And the most singular example in recent times was the so-called grooming gangs scandal, which people went to enormous lengths to cover up. And I think if Elon Musk hadn't brought it to the fore on X, the cover-up might have succeeded. So I come from the land of the cover-up. Yeah. And think of the Cambridge Spies cover-up, which took decades to be blown. The United States,
and I'll just say a smaller one, not as impactful as that, but what Boris Johnson tried to do around COVID was also just a shameless attempt to cover something up that was blatant,
Well,
right?
the thing about Boris was that he was a kind of one-man scandal,
Yeah.
serial scandals, each one of which required a cover-up until
Right.
finally it could be covered up no more. But the interesting thing, to go back to Watergate, is that Americans are quite hostile to cover-ups, and that means that the allegation of a cover-up has a different salience here. Remember, what brought Nixon down was not the break-in itself; it was the cover-up. And with the Epstein case, there are a couple of things that I think any reasonable person must wonder about. The first is that there really should be, and as far as I knew, was a list of people who Epstein regarded as his clients or intimates. And it's a little strange that that's suddenly not obtainable. And there's also, I think, long been a cloud of mystery around the circumstances of his death, alleged suicide while in custody. So I think there's something fishy here. The Wall Street Journal went for the Trump Epstein relationship. And of course, that really infuriated the president. But one wonders why it infuriated him so much. Lots of people went to Epstein's parties, from the psychologist Steve Pinker through his Harvard colleague Alan Dershowitz to Prince Andrew. And those of us who have a passing familiarity with President Trump's moral life can't be entirely surprised that President Trump hung out somewhat with Epstein. I'm struggling to think of anything that would really necessitate a cover-up for the president's sake at this point. So there's something funny here. And I think what's important about it, Mark, is that it just strikes a nerve with an important part of his base in a way that nothing previously has. So I have just been reading Sam Tannenhaus's excellent new biography of Bill Buckley, which is like a history of American conservatism going all the way back to the 1930s. And what I learned reading it is that there's long been a part of the American right which is extremely attracted by conspiracy theories, which often spills over into anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry. Buckley spent a lot of his life trying to get away from his early associations with America First, as well as with the John Birchers, as well as with some anti-Semitic and segregationist elements on the far right. And I sense those old monsters on the periphery resurfacing here. Tucker Carlson's attempting to link Epstein to Mossad as part of his increasingly overt anti-Israel campaign. All of this, I think, is a problem for Trump because it's a real division in his base. And you saw that when Carlson got an ovation at the Turning Point USA conference, trying to make this connection from the Epstein scandal to Israel. So I think it's that subject that President Trump really wants to change, because it does seem potentially quite problematic for the base. And even if it's only 5% or maybe 10% of Republican voters who are turned off by this and feel that something really fishy is going on, that could be a problem next year at the midterms for a bunch of House Republican candidates. So that's how I'm thinking about all this. And trying to change the subject when it's as salient as this with your base is hard. Saying you're going to sack the Fed chair, which is the default setting when Trump wants to change the subject these days, didn't work. And so we finally get to Obama, which I think was quite a clever strategy, especially since it solicited a reaction, because Obama mostly tries to keep out of the way, enjoy life on Martha's Vineyard, and all the perquisites of his success in the private sector. So Trump has certainly done a smart thing if the goal is to change the subject, because this is much more likely to succeed than I'm going to sack Jay Powell, which I said last week.
That he said last week. I want to get to the community at half past. So we got 10 minutes. I want to try to do 15 topics in 10 minutes. Ready?
Okay.
And well, you're going to start with 3 things you said. You can give really short answers, but nothing longer than 30 seconds.
Got it.
Please. Here we go. Bill Buckley. You mentioned Bill Buckley. You ever meet him?
I don't think I ever did. Or if I did, it was in a crowded room.
All right. There's a more loaded question. You ever meet Jeffrey Epstein?
No, never.
You and I have many friends who did meet Jeffrey Epstein. I know you do because I know some people I know who are your friends who are my friends who knew him. What's your friend's kind of macro impression of Jeffrey Epstein?
It's interesting how little people like to talk about Jeffrey
Yeah.
Epstein.
Interesting, but not surprising.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think his social network extended right into the Harvard faculty, and I regard
Yeah.
it as an act of divine grace that he never somehow or rather got into any room that I was in.
There you go. All right. I just want to clarify. You referred to as alleged suicide. I think you used the word alleged, but are you open to the notion that he didn't commit suicide?
I think one has to be.
Yeah.
Very
That's
hard to
my
commit suicide in custody. They don't like you
yeah.
doing that.
Yeah, for him to do it, the guards he had to assume the guards might come in and interrupt him. Now, this is a good historical question for you. Can you name any case of any person that's ever been reported interrupted in the act of trying to commit suicide?
No,
Anything,
but I
right?
bet you can.
No, I
I mean, I
can't.
can't think
I
of one.
can't. I can't. No, but I'm saying like people don't try to commit suicide if they think someone's going to interrupt them. I base that on the fact that I've never read an account. I'm sure it's happened, but it's obviously not particularly common, including in prison. Because if somebody tried to commit suicide in prison and they were interrupted by the guards, it'd be reported. He had no way to know the guards were sleeping and shopping. He had
Right.
no
This
access
is
to that.
this has been for me always a bit of
Yeah.
a mystery for the reason
Yeah.
you give.
Yeah. Okay. How will, and you can take 45 seconds on this one. How will the war between Russia and Ukraine end?
Well, it's distinctly possible that it will end ultimately with a Russian victory. I said that right at the outset,
You did.
because there's a huge imbalance in economic and manpower terms, and Ukraine can't fight this war indefinitely. It doesn't have the manpower, and support from the West is too unreliable, whereas Russia has Chinese support, which is unwavering. I'm quite pessimistic about this on a 12-month time horizon. Trump has to end this war because if he doesn't find a diplomatic solution, the risk is that Kyiv ultimately falls. And I don't think the president wants that to happen on his watch.
How would Kyiv fall? Would it be ground troops? Would it be airstrikes, decapitation of the government? How would
Well,
it fall?
we're in the midst of a massive escalation in Russian airstrikes on
Yeah.
Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, the highest we've seen at any point in the war. But I think the big risk to Ukraine is just that the front line, which is a very long front line, can't be held when the Ukrainian army is struggling to replenish its numbers. It's an elderly army by historical standards because young Ukrainians don't want to fight. And the other way that Ukraine can collapse is domestically, because it is a democracy, but we're seeing the first signs of fault lines within Ukrainian politics. President Zelensky just reshuffled his government. There's a huge controversy building around the potential closure of the Independent Anti-Corruption Office. So Ukraine can collapse on the front line. It can collapse at home. But what's very hard to imagine for me is Russia collapsing. And in that scenario, if you just look at the sheer discrepancy in population, population's 4 times larger, GDP is 11 times larger. It's quite unusual in this kind of a situation for David to beat Goliath, much as you'd like that to happen.
Yeah. Again, if you want to be in on the conversation, opportunity to ask Neil a question, please raise your hand. All our smart friends in finance predicted doom for the world economy, the American economy, when the president started his tariff shenanigans. I say shenanigans euphemistically, even though it's not a particularly kind word. And they said it was the greatest own goal, and Scott Bessent was an idiot. That doesn't seem to be happening. Now, we haven't gotten to back to school shopping and Thanksgiving and Halloween and Christmas, but what did the smart people we know in finance who were so derisive, what did they miscalculate? What did they get wrong?
Well, I don't think they were entirely wrong. I was amongst them because what was announced on April 2nd, Liberation Day, was incredibly disruptive economically. And I think if the president hadn't walked back the reciprocal tariffs 7 days later, under pressure from Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, we might well have had a serious financial crisis in the bond market, because it really was a quite dangerous moment. And I was worried. The fact that then there was a postponement, which turned out to be a relatively loose postponement since we've passed the deadline, and that the tariffs have been negotiated in a much less rigorous way with individual countries, has taken some of the heat out of the financial anxiety. But you're right to say, Mark, that it looks with hindsight like overreaction, because as the president announces the tariffs that are being agreed with different countries, they're coming in quite high.
Yeah.
And the story Wall Street told itself was, oh, it's all going to end up being 10%, no biggie. I'm struggling to see people with a 10% deal apart from the UK at this point. Everybody else is being asked to pay substantially more. So I think there's a chance that the markets have to take another look at this after the summer. And when they do, they're going to discover that the impact on prices is not trivial. It's going to make it hard for the Fed to cut, much harder than it would have been otherwise. And it's going to impact the bottom line of quite a number of companies, particularly those that are reliant, even if it's only indirectly, on Chinese supply chains. So I think it's a little early to say it was all or nothing burger. Why was anybody worried? Because it's summer. Things tend to get repriced on Wall Street in September, October, not July.
Right. I agree with all that. All right. So many places to go. I'm mindful of the clock. Zero means how much you care about Danish bridge tournaments, and 10 is the Premier League, which you care a lot of. You care a lot about, right?
I'm an Arsenal fan.
Yeah,
We've got to win it sooner or later.
Yeah. All right. So tell me how much you care about these. Again, zero Danish bridge, 10 Premier League. The cancellation of Stephen Colbert's program.
Is there anything below zero?
Okay, it's the negative something. The return of Ted Lasso.
I don't watch TV, so that's another zero.
Okay, another zero. Okay, who gets elected mayor of New York City?
That's a 6.
Okay, why does that matter to you, someone who doesn't live in New York City?
Well, I have a business based in New York City,
Yeah.
my advisory business, as you know, Mark, and I also love New York City, and I want New York City to do well and not to repeat the mistakes of the past. I first went to New York City as a 17-year-old in 1981, and it was way more dangerous than any British city, including my own native Glasgow. I don't think New York wants to go back to the way it was. But there's a real risk that it will if voters decide to gamble on socialism, which has, of course, been tried and has always failed wherever it's been tried. It'll fail in New York City too, and that could get ugly. So that is a 6 for me.
Okay. A full discussion of this new poll that we did on the mayor's race on Next Up, which you can see now on YouTube. Listen to a podcast with David Burrell of Wick, who did the poll, and our polling partner, and John Podorz. I want to show you guys, and Neil, I want to show you a few poll results from this survey, and it goes to this question of socialism. Number 4, please, in the polls. Mondami is seen as the most. We asked about not just the mayoral candidates, but one thing we did in this poll with purpose was to ask about Donald Trump. Here we go. Who's seen as focused on the cost of living? And we let the voters pick anybody. Was this person focused on the cost of living? And you can see there, Mondami easily seen as focused on the cost of living. Now, who can shake the system up? Number 6. Who can shake the system up? Number 6. And again, let's make that full if we can, Sam, so everybody can see it. Who will shake the system up? Mondami 52%, Trump 38%, Cuomo only 16%. Curtis Sliwa 20%. So who will shake the system up easily? Mondami, even more than Trump. And then this is the one that might interest me the most, and this is one I want you to comment on, Neil. You can comment on them all, but this is one I want you to start with. Number 8, who represents elites? Who represents elites or the interests of elites or oligarchs? Donald Trump 57%, Andrew Cuomo 40%, Mondami 16%. I'd like to meet that 16% because I can't imagine why they think that, but to me, Neil, this is more than the poll shows New Yorkers split on socialism. I'm not so surprised by that. But this, to me, is why he's doing well, is because he's anti-elite, he's anti-oligarch. And I'm wondering if you think that's true of New York, not just of New York City, but around the land. And one thing about Donald Trump that I consider underrated is he's a billionaire who's convinced at least some of the country that he's against the oligarchs and elites, even though that's who he is and who his friends are. So what do you think of that theory about why Mondami is doing well, as opposed to because he's a socialist?
Well, I have been saying for 10 years that populism comes in 2 flavors. You can have the populism of the right, and you can have the populism of the left. But often these two flavors, they may look a little different and they may taste a little different, but they have a lot in common. President Trump was first propelled to power in the 2016 election because it was believed that he would shake things up and he would take on a corrupt elite personified by the Clintons and the Obamas. And it worked. He got re-elected last year, partly because of inflation. Because let's not forget that inflation hit 9% on the Biden-Harris administration's watch. And so really, these are things that he previously would have polled strongly on that he's now not polling strongly on. Why? Because in New York, which is a very, very expensive place to live, there's a cost of living issue. Because the left now represents shaking things up. You can't shake things up when you've just been elected to your second term as president. And yeah, I mean, from a New York perspective, Donald Trump is the elite. I mean, those towers aren't telling you man of the people. So I think it's quite specific to New York, this, but not unique to New York, because in other parts of the country, we can see the progressive or even socialist wing of the Democratic Party in the ascendant. I think that will lead to bad municipal government in other places. Speaking as somebody who spent a lot of the last 7 years in close proximity to San Francisco, which is like a sort of advertisement for how to destroy a city with radical progressive policies, I am not a big fan of those policies. And if they are adopted from New York to Minneapolis, hard luck to the people living there. But you can see why this is happening. Voters are impatient with inflation. They like to call it cost of living, but that's what they're really talking about. And by the way, the tariffs have definitely done something to put inflation up. It's going to be above 3%, where it was trending down towards 2%. They definitely want some sense that the system's being shaken up. That's what makes populism work, whether it's from the left or from the right. And there's a kind of preoccupation with inequality that hasn't entirely gone away. Why would it? Nothing that President Trump has done in either term has been notably progressive in terms of its impact on income distribution, except for one thing, Mark. In his first term, unlike every president pretty much since Richard Nixon, President Trump caused or presided over a big increase in median household income adjusted for inflation, which had flatlined from the 90s right the way through till 2016. But in other ways, it's not like inequality significantly diminished, and Trump's tax cuts disproportionately benefit the wealthy. That was true when they were first passed, and it's true now that they're being renewed. So you can see why this is happening. But it's bad news because, I'd rather go with the populism of the right than the populism of the left if I had to choose. I wish there was something else on offer, but that's the choice. And if you have to look back historically, there's no question which does more damage.
All right, we're over. It's my fault, not yours. And I want to do one more topic, and then we're going to go to your questions after this one topic. So please raise your hand. And this has, well, let me just say about the poll. Some of you think I'm an ass, but some of you have some confidence in my judgment. Go read the full poll. It's on my Substack. It's on the WIC website. If you're interested in the New York City mayor's race and how this electorate, this complicated electorate, we've never had an election like this, four-way choice at this time, a city that's elected Giuliani and Bloomberg 5 terms recently, right, is not a city that reflexively elects far liberal mayors. Go read the full poll. It's fascinating. And what you'll find, I believe, is that it's on this trajectory, Mondami can't lose. As long as these other 3 candidates are in the race, as long as his approval rating stays where it is. So how can he lose? There are 3 things that would have to happen, some combination of 3. And we talk about this on Next Up. You can read it for yourself in the poll. One is 2 or more of the 3 candidates either have to get out or they have to really be deflated. Voters have to say, if I want to stop Mondami, I have to vote. And that the strongest one of the 3 on paper right now is Cuomo. So number 1 is it has to be a 2-person race effectively or Mondami win. Or another option, they have to really drive up his negatives. They have to make people see him not as a change agent and an opponent of oligarchs. They really have to see him not just as a socialist, but as an unacceptable socialist. And the third thing is to change the electorate. Any pollster, and David Burrell, who did the poll, will tell you this, the poll's only as good as the pollster's ability to understand who's going to vote. And part of why the primary polls were so off, and Mondami, who was shown as losing to Cuomo, won pretty decisively, is because pollsters didn't understand who was going to turn out. There are certain voting groups, like Hispanics, who don't seem inclined to vote for Mondami. If they turn out in higher numbers than the pollsters currently believe, someone else might be able to win. But it's going to take a combination of those three factors. I recommend the poll to you. One thing, Neil, I want to get you on is the Democratic Party. I can't think of a modern historical analog. You have to go back to the Reagan era to find the closest thing, when Democrats lost 49 states to a party this adrift for since Reagan. Either party, I don't think it's been in quite this position. Here is your cousin. I believe it's your cousin because the accents are so similar. This is Ben Ferguson with me on Next Up, talking about the Democratic Party, number 23, please.
You look at the Democratic Party right now, I think it's not just a civil war. I don't think the Democratic Party knows who they are. And so if you talk to someone that's probably 35 or younger, they believe that the Democratic Party is communist or socialist. They believe in AOCs. They believe in this candidate out in New York City. That's where they see the party. The traditional guard, if you're 35 or older in the Democratic Party, you're going, hold on, we can't win nationwide with this. This isn't working for us. And so you created this AOC world. You embraced it. And now what do? How do you get rid of it? How do you bring everybody back in line? I'm not sure you can get that back in the bottle. And that's the reason why I think you see, even when there are, quote, stumbles and opportunities for Democrats to move forward that they see and they try to play into them, it doesn't seem to matter because someone gets them off message so quick that they can't capitalize on it. And that's why I think they are in serious trouble right now.
Yeah, I'm wondering what you think of that analysis. And obviously, we've seen in other industrialized democracies that don't have our system, they've got a parliamentary system. We've seen the Labour Party in Britain, for instance, go through long stretches with very similar issues. How do you appraise the current state of the Democratic Party in historical context?
Yeah, I took a look at some polling today. It's amazing how badly the party itself polls. Its favorability is much worse than the Republican parties, which, considering how many radical things President Trump has done, and considering all the things that you could find fault with since he came back into office, is quite remarkable. And I think it's the old story that a party divided rarely fares well. And the party is obviously deeply divided. It's also in denial about why it lost. And I think it's remarkable how long it is taking the Democratic Party to face the reasons for defeat. And as long as they're in that first stage of grief, denial, then they're not going to learn what they need to learn if they're going to have a viable candidate come 2028. They could even bungle the midterms. I mean, normally, whoever's in the White House's party does badly in the midterms. I'm not completely certain that that will be true next year, especially if the economy holds up. There's no recession. The predictions of recession have largely faded away. And President Trump continues to control the narrative in a way that really is peerless. I mean, the man's ability to lead the news, you see this, Mark, almost every week, is second to none. So I think the Democrats are in a kind of wilderness. I'll add one more point: generational division. Generational division is the single most striking feature of modern democracy, both sides of the Atlantic. It's also division within male and female voters amongst the young. This is very problematic for the Democratic Party, makes it very difficult for them to have a unified vision.
There are very few people in America whose work I read in full. And I typically don't read anything longer than a Dixie Riddle cup. I read everything Neil writes, and you should too. Is your work all now appearing on the Free Press, right?
I write regularly for the Free Press. I just did a piece about President Milei in Argentina, who's one of my heroes. But I also write a monthly essay for the London Times, just to remind my fellow Britons that I still exist.
I'm telling you again, if you trust my judgment, read everything Neil writes. And even if it's a topic you say, well, what do I care about Argentinian debt or penguins in Latin America? Read it. Everything he writes, it's like a graduate education. It's accessible, and he slips in a lot of sly jokes. I don't always get the jokes, but I can identify them as such. All right, let's go to your questions again. As always, say where you are and what's on your mind. I can tell Greg's honored to speak to Professor Ferguson. Greg, welcome in. What's on your mind for Neil after you tell us where you are?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Calling from Berkeley Heights, New Jersey, about 30 minutes west in New York City. Mark, first off, thank you for the platform. These conversations are fantastic, and having the opportunity to speak with someone like Neil is just really remarkable. And Neil, I'm a huge fan. I've read all your books and couldn't agree with you, Mark. Anything Neil's writes is a must read. So just two quick questions with time. I think first question, what's the next book you're working on? And two, like, what's a commonly misunderstood or misrepresented period in history that you think people should better understand?
Two great questions, but Neil's not going to answer to you. Hold the baby up. We need a
Yeah,
we
let's
need
have a better
we
look
need a
at
better
A
look.
two-way member from the beginning.
Yeah, that's
Hey,
wonderful.
what's her name?
Blair.
Hey, Blair.
Beautiful. All right,
Great,
Neil.
great.
Current book and then the history question.
I'm finishing the hardest book I've ever written, which is the second volume of my life of Henry Kissinger. So I'm deep in the weeds of the 1970s, partly why Watergate was uppermost in my mind when we started talking scandal. What is it that is, I think, misunderstood? I mentioned it earlier. People talk about the United States without enough reference to the 19th century. And they always use their own personal experience or the recent past to try and assess things. But I'm telling you, when you go back and read, say, Hugh Brogan's Great History of the United States, and you read the chapters of the 19th century, particularly the post-Civil War period, you keep saying to yourself, gee, this sounds familiar. These populist themes of, tariffs, of cheap money, exclusion, it's really the essence of Trumpism. And since a lot of Trump haters always want to reach for interwar Europe parallels. Oh, he's Mussolini, he's Hitler, all that stuff. I've said all along, this is complete category error. You have to understand Donald Trump in American terms, but you have to go back. You have to go back more than 100 years to really find where his politics comes from, especially including the tariffs.
Greg, thank you. Grateful to you for being part of Two Way. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, Greg.
Every so often, not very often, and I'm not inviting it. Members of the community will email me in advance of the program and say they really want to ask a question, and it doesn't happen a lot. But Wendy emailed me and she told me what her two questions were, and I made it clear that, again, speaking to Neil is a wonderful opportunity. So Wendy, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, and you go ahead and ask both your questions to Neil. I'm sure he'll welcome them both.
Thank you so much. I'm from the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area in Minnesota, and I was so excited to hear you were on, Neil. On the rare times I'm not glued to YouTube watching every two-way episode that there is, because I barely miss any of them. I scroll and look for any interviews with you on YouTube, and also I follow your lovely wife, Ayan Hersey Ali, as well. I haven't read any of your books, but I have read two of hers. So I have two questions for you. One, I have some pretty bright, accomplished granddaughters that are getting to college age. And I've been reading a lot and looking into your Austin University, which excites me a lot. I don't want to send my granddaughters off to college and have them come back with with orange hair and nose rings. So I don't think that would happen at Austin University. So I'd just like to know a couple of things. How many students do you take in a year? And how many do you have to turn away? And what's the kind of annual cost? There's that. And then my other question is totally different, because I do follow Ayan a lot, and I do live in a Minneapolis metro area. I've been watching what's been going on in London and England and some of the European countries, and we're seeing some of the same things happen around here. And I'm just wondering what you think Americans should think about, the administration should think about, that we don't end up with some of the same situations here in America.
Okay, Wendy.
Well, thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, hold on, Neil. I'm sorry. Apologize. Wendy, thank you for that. It's a little context for people who may not know. Neil's involved in this new university. It's in Austin, and he'll answer Wendy's question, tell you about it. But if you haven't read about it, I recommend it to you. It's been covered in the news. It's an incredibly exciting experiment and new enterprise that every American should hope succeed. And then second, if you don't know, men often joke that their spouses, they married up. Neil did. Neil's wife is brilliant and accomplished. And if you don't know who she is, you should Google that. Neil.
Right. So thanks, Mark, and thank you, Wendy. Yeah, you should definitely encourage your granddaughters to apply, though I have no way of guaranteeing what their hair color and jewelry will be like after 4 years at the University of Austin, because, we don't police that stuff, but we do ensure, in fact, we don't police anything. We ensure free speech, free thought. It's a very meritocratic institution. I'll answer your questions very fast. We're keeping the class size small, so fewer than 100 places each year, because we want to maintain high standards. Our admissions are purely based on tests. We are looking for people who ace it academically. We don't care how good they are at lacrosse. We don't want to read their essay about how they're going to bring world peace. We just want smart people, regardless of color, creed, gender, you name it. That's our admissions policy. By the way, no other university has that admissions policy in the United States today. They're all engaged in some kind of discrimination by other means. And its tuition is free. We cover all tuition because for 4 years, we are not able to be fully accredited. That's why very few universities get created today. The barrier to entry is real. We're not fully accredited until we graduate our first class. And so in order to incentivize smart, ambitious people to come to a startup university, we have said that the first students will have their tuition covered, and that will also be true. It was true last year. It will be true this year. I think I answered all your University of Austin questions, but please do support UATX, everybody listening. American higher education is in a parlous state, a disastrous state, and we're the only startup university that is reinventing academic life so that it can be based on true intellectual freedom and also meritocracy. Okay, Ayaan Hirsi Ali is my wife. She's much more interesting than me. Many of you wish it was her who was speaking here, not me, but you're stuck with me. And Ayaan has also been a big influence on my thinking. Somebody who comes from a Muslim background, who went through a period of atheism and then found her way to Christianity, has led a remarkable journey. And in joining her on this journey, I've learned an immense amount about life, about the nature of freedom, and also about what it is that makes a stable and prosperous society. The lesson for your state, and indeed for the United States, Wendy, is that if you allow unchecked immigration and then have no real means of integrating and assimilating the newcomers into your values, then disaster will come. The United Kingdom is a lot further down the path to disaster than the United States, but the United States is on that same path. We see it even more clearly in Canada, where there's been an even larger influx relative to the population. And it's not that immigration's bad. I'm an immigrant, for heaven's sake, to the United States. So is Ayaan. Ayaan was once an asylum seeker in the Netherlands. But we've both accepted the values of the United States, the core principles of constitutional order and the rule of law. That doesn't happen spontaneously. The people who've come to the United States in recent years need to understand what it is that they're buying into, in the same way that people who arrived in Europe or in the UK or in Canada in recent years do. And we haven't done a brilliant job on both sides of the Atlantic in making that come about. My wife has written more thoughtfully and persuasively on these issues than anyone else I know. And so for everyone listening, do follow Ayaan Hirsi Ali, read her books, start with Infidel, and read the new one that's going to come out, I think, next year, about her path to Christianity. It's going to be a remarkable book.
Wendy, thank you. Thank you for your kind words and for being part of Two Way. Grateful to you. Beverly, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind for Niall after you unmute. Thank you.
Hi, and I want to tell Mark that this is the greatest program ever. I've watched morning meetings since last July, a year ago. My questions, Niall, are what do you foresee in Europe and the UK's participation in NATO taking a stronger role in the future for the UK and Russia war? My second question is, what's the status of Scotland's independence movement?
Two excellent questions. You know, President Trump gets a lot of criticism. I sometimes criticize him too, but you got to hand it to him. He has brought about a massive shakeup in NATO. He has got the European members of NATO to commit to a huge increase in their defense spending, from in many cases below 2% just a few years ago up to 5%. And we're already seeing this happening. It's remarkable, for example, what's happening in Germany. And this is good. For far too long, the United States had to shoulder much too much of the burden of defending Europe. And finally, an American president got the Europeans to get serious about this, and it was Donald Trump. Hats off. You got to acknowledge a win when you see a win, and this has been a big one. The NATO summit was remarkable for the way in which the Europeans essentially stood to attention and accepted Trump's
Neil,
orders.
I'm just going to interrupt you to say I agree with you. And it's amazing to me that not only is that not the way it's emphasized in the coverage and conversation, including amongst most of the Europeans, but that there are people who deny what you just said. I just find it phenomenal because I think it's unambiguously true. And I love the way you said it.
It's a good sign of Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah,
if somebody doesn't realize this is good.
Yeah.
But, you know, listen to Chancellor Merz, the German Chancellor. I heard a great interview with him for the BBC just the other day. I mean, he is entirely on board with this and recognizes its importance. And this is the key to Ukraine's future. It's clear that the United States can't have an open-ended commitment to an endless war in Eastern Europe. That's been clear for some time. But Ukraine will only be able to preserve its independence with European support. And we have to see that rapidly come online. That's why it's so important that Germany is rearming in the way that it is. And by the way, the two words that will make a Russian dictator wake up in a cold sweat at 2 a.m. are German rearmament. The second question was Scotland. I'm a proud Scot. I spent the first 17 years of my life in and around Glasgow. I have been an opponent of Scottish independence for most of my life. I briefly believed in it when I was about 15, and it is a kind of teenage idea that little Scotland should become an independent state. It makes no economic sense at all. And I'm in agreement with Dr. Johnson, who famously said to James Boswell that the finest sight a Scotsman ever sees is the high road to London. He might have said the flight path to New York if that had existed back in the 18th century. So Scottish independence peaked with the referendum of 2014 as a project. I hope it's gone away. If it ever comes back, I shall be in despair, but I think it's over as a project.
All right, Beverly, thank you. Two great questions. Really appreciate it. Chris, welcome in. Neil, Chris lives in Atlanta, Georgia. And although both Chris and his city are too busy to hate, Chris has met some people who find the time for it. Chris.
Yeah, I have two questions for Mr. Ferguson. My first one would be, are you planning to put many people into society who actually get to the top of society, given that most CEOs, when surveyed, say that people with the highest test scores never end up running anything? And I'm a Harvard guy with a Mensa certificate, so I don't have a problem with you discriminating against people with low test scores. But my history says that the people with the highest test scores don't generally end up running anything, or even being of any consequence in life. That's my first question to you. And my second one is, do you agree with J.D. Vance when he says things like he said recently at the Claremont Institute, that people whose ancestors fought in the Civil and Revolutionary Wars have a greater claim on being American than people who migrate from other countries?
Two great questions, Chris. Right now, the University of Austin is using test scores because we're at too early a stage to have our own entrance exam. But that's what we want to get to, because admissions at most universities are just broken. What we need is a way of identifying talent, including potential talent. And that is not always revealed in test scores. Our goal is to produce a leadership elite, a future leadership elite for the United States. And so, Chris, we'll be moving on in the coming years to have our own very carefully designed set of tests. I like to describe our project at the University of Austin to produce the Navy SEALs of the mind. And if you think about how they go about selecting SEALs, we should go about selecting our best and brightest with the same kind of rigor. So it's early days for us, and I share your skepticism about test scores, but they're better than what they do at Harvard, which is a kind of black box of corruption and discrimination. So that was question one. And now question two is on the tip of my tongue. J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance. Yeah.
You know, I don't agree that there should be a hierarchy of Americans. I think as a newly minted 2018 vintage American citizen, I should have the same rights and obligations as somebody whose ancestors came over with the Mayflower or fought at Gettysburg I don't think we should draw those distinctions. After all, I'm going to just guess here, your ancestors did not voluntarily come to the United States. They came as slaves. Just guessing here, but correct me if I'm wrong. And yet, one of the most important projects of our lifetimes, and I was born in 1964, was to achieve equal rights for African Americans, for the pledges that were implicit at the founding to become real. And so I really am very skeptical about the idea that there's a hierarchy of American citizenship. Well, all citizens are equal. That's a key tenet of the Republic.
Chris, thank you. Grateful to you. Neil, tell us about your relationship with J.D. Vance overall. Do you know him?
I met J.D. Vance many years ago when he was publishing Hillbilly Elegy, and I have not been in close contact with him since. We had a little bit of a disagreement about President Trump's strategy towards the war in Ukraine that went public when he attacked something that I think I wrote on X. But I like the fact that in that disagreement, though it was strongly worded, it was well argued. The question was really whether there was an analogy between the situation of Kuwait when Saddam Hussein invaded it and the situation of Ukraine when Putin invaded it. And his point was, we are in a different world. And it's certainly arguable that the United States doesn't have the capability that it had back then to intervene directly and expel Saddam in the way that I think I'd love to have seen Putin be expelled. So we had a good, frank discussion. I like the fact that the vice president is a smart man. He is an intellectual, but he's also somebody who comes from anything but the elite. And those two things are, I think, are attractive features. I don't know what you think about his political future, Mark, but last I checked on the polling, he is in the lead to succeed President Trump, even though it is quite hard for a vice president to become a president historically. And on his performance, I would be at this point quite well disposed towards that scenario so far.
Right. All right. I'm gonna challenge your premise, and it's rare I'd have the gumption to challenge you on an historical matter. George H.W. Bush succeeded to the presidency. Al Gore, more people went to the polls in Florida on election day intending to vote for Al Gore than George Bush. So he effectively did win the election based on the voters' preferences. So that would have been a second one. And of course, Joe Biden was vice president and became president. So since President Reagan, 3 vice presidents have effectively been elected president.
But Mark, you're not going back nearly far enough. Most vice presidential runs did not succeed.
Yeah, you're paid to think in decades and centuries. I just do Reagan on. That's my
being vice president is on net historically actually a handicap if your ambition is to become president. And George H.W. Bush is quite an unusual counterexample.
Not in the modern era. In the modern era, we've had 3. All right.
You can't count Al Gore. He didn't become president. Come on.
But he voters voted him to be president. He just didn't assume the presidency. There's no doubt
to the historian. We're interested in outcomes.
If you're interested in the question of who the voters choose, the voters chose Al Gore. He just didn't take the office. All right, close. 3 quick pieces of advice from you. Number 1, we're somewhere in Europe that's underappreciated that people here should go visit. Could be a building or a restaurant or a town. What's a place people should go that you know about and people underappreciated?
Lithuania. Visit Vilnius for 2 reasons. One, the most extraordinary history of what was once the Jerusalem of the North. Also, the front line if Ukraine loses, the next country that Putin goes after. But it's also beautiful.
All right, you're a lovely writer. Who's someone who's writing besides your own would you recommend people read if they want to become a better writer?
I adore David Hume, but most people read his philosophy and not his history. Hume's History of England is a very, very wonderful read, and I highly recommend it. It's underread. The other Scotsman I'm going to push is Walter Scott. Once renowned as the great novelist, now unread, but you must read Scott. He was a wonderful writer, every bit as good as Dickens.
All right, and what's advice for booking your wife on this program?
Email won't work.
I know. When I email her, sometimes she'll respond 9 months later and say, "Oops, So, all right, we'll find another way in. Neil, couldn't be more grateful to you for spending the hour with us. Even though we'll never get your wife, we hope you'll come back.
You might one day, Mark. I'll speak
I
very
know.
highly. It's
I'll
been
dream.
fun.
I'll dream.
You have a
I'm
great
gonna
audience.
send her a link to the YouTube, and I'm gonna put a subject line like "Did you hear this?" or something. Maybe she'll open it and see.
I'll nudge her.
The
The
link.
email won't work, but I can
I
act
know.
as
Believe me,
I'll
I
act
know.
as an intermediary. How about that?
Okay. Neil, thank you. Very grateful to you for spending the time. Really
My
enjoyed
pleasure,
it.
Mark.
Thank you
all.
All right. Right now, turn over, watch Michael Moynihan. His program's on right now, and he's got his guest is Ari Aster, the director of Eddington, which is, again, the it film of the moment. My new episode of Next Up with Ben Ferguson and our new poll on the New York City mayor's race and my reported monologues on 5 big political clashes available now. And I'll see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time with Sean and Dan for the morning meeting. Have a good night, everybody.